How come Gandhari gave birth to 100 children? Is it not test tube baby?
महाभारत में टेक्नोलॉजी था, इंटरनेट था, सैटेलाइट थी।
सीता जी का जन्म हुआ तो घड़े से हुआ। आज का जो टेस्ट ट्यूब बेबी है कुछ रहा होगा।
कर्ण का जो जन्म हुआ था वो स्टेम सेल का साइंस था, टेक्नोलॉजी थी। अब स्टेम सेल वाले यही करते हो ना।
You're watching a special edition of Reality Check where we have a very special guest. We have Nobel Prize winner for chemistry, Dr. Venki Ramakrishnan here with us. And the reason we have him in studio is because he's written this fabulous new book called Gene Machine. It's all about how he went about working on the ribosome and how he started his work, and then, of course, ends with the fabulous win of the Nobel Prize. Thanks so much for being here. And since it's a rare opportunity that we have a Nobel Prize winner here on Reality Check, we really decided, before we talk to him about this book, we thought perhaps it's a great opportunity because of late we've seen a lot of scientific facts that we've come to learn from our textbooks and all being challenged by people who seem to be in various positions of importance. So, Professor Ramakrishnan, would we ask you, for our viewers, to do a bit of a reality check for us?
Certainly.
Okay, well, what's interesting is that of late we've seen lots of these comments. So let's take the first one. We'll start off with the Vice Chancellor of the Andhra University, and let's just see what he said.
How come Gandhari gave birth to 100 children? Is it humanly possible? And again, Mahabharata says the same thing. 100 fertilized eggs are put into 100 earthen pots. Is it not test tube baby? We had 100 Kauravas for one mother because of stem cell technology, because of test tube babies. It happened a few thousand years ago. This was science.
So that's the Vice Chancellor of the Andhra University, Dr. Ramakrishnan, claiming there was IVF technology, test tube babies in the Mahabharat. Is that fact or fiction?
It's complete nonsense, to put it bluntly. I think one should read these scriptures in an allegorical way and not take it literally. But besides that, even if it were true, it wouldn't be science. Science means that you have to propose something that's testable by experiment. You have to show the experimental evidence, but it's not just that you have to show it. You have to show it in a way that anyone else who is expert can read it and reproduce it. Mm-hmm. So when people talk about, IVF and test tube babies, if in those books there had been a detailed description of how to produce a test tube baby that we could reproduce today, then it would be science. Otherwise, it's not science. It's the same thing. Lots of people have fantasized about flying machines and so on. But unless you have a detailed blueprint and instructions on how to construct and create an aircraft that we could follow, it's not science. Okay, science is experiment, evidence, but in a way that's reproducible by other people. So that's the fundamental property that distinguishes science from what I would call pseudoscience or non-science.
That's such a wonderful way to describe it, because you're right. People just say we had evidence of that, those books showed it, and that's just such a wonderful way.
Yes, but the point is the books did not show it.
Yes.
They simply stated something, but it could have been imagination. Imagine if somebody 1,000 years from now were reading a Harry Potter novel, okay? It doesn't mean that, wizards actually existed and so on. So you have to...
That's a great point. Okay, so when we have another person, this is, of course, of the Punjab University, he said, there is nothing like Lord Brahma, who is the creator of the universe, didn't know. He was completely aware of the existence of dinosaurs and even mentioned them in Vedas before anyone else in the world. It was Lord Brahma who discovered dinosaurs' existence on Earth.
It's again a misreading. Supposing in a work of mythology or scripture, however you view it, you describe some large monstrous creature. Well, such large monstrous creatures have been discussed in in Greek classics and all sorts of stories all over the world. This is just part of human imagination. It doesn't mean specifically dinosaurs. So again, this is one of these things which is a category error. Now, if the person had said, we know of creatures that existed between this period and this period, that they were reptiles, they laid eggs, their bones are to be found in these regions, then, you would have some credibility. But just describing a large, fantastic creature, humans have done that probably as long as we've been around.
Well, it becomes, Dr. Ramakrishnan has just busted what some of these alleged academics have said, but it becomes even more tricky when politicians who want the attention of large numbers of people, when they say things. Look at what the UP Deputy Chief Minister said.
सीता जी का जन्म हुआ तो घड़े से हुआ, उस समय टेस्ट ट्यूब बेबी का कोई ना कोई प्रोजेक्ट रहा होगा उस प्रकार का, जो घड़ से हल चलाया जनक जी ने और उसके घड़े के अंदर से वो बेबी निकली, सीता जी बन गई. ये कोई ना कोई टेक्नोलॉजी जो आज का जो टेस्ट ट्यूब बेबी है कुछ रहा होगा.
So I guess your response to the first answer of test tube baby, that stands again.
It's again, science is based on testable experiments, and the experiments have to be able to be reproduced. So when I publish a paper, I publish detailed procedures so that my competitors or future generations of scientists can read my paper, and if they're trained in the art, they can actually reproduce it. And in fact, many people have. Crystals that we discovered in our lab were reproduced sometimes by our competitors.
Right.
So the point is, that's how science works. It's not a matter of claiming something or simply stating something. That does not make it science.
Does this happen to you in America, Dr. Ramakrishnan, that there are people who say, well, because it's happening a lot here in India.
I think it's a universal problem. For example, in the West, there was a paper that turned out to be completely wrong, saying that vaccination was dangerous. And it has resulted in this huge anti-vaccination movement, which has resulted in many thousands of deaths.
Of course, yeah.
Okay? So that's an example of, pseudoscience being propagated in the West. There are people who question whether climate change is happening. There are, even in the West,
politicians, of course.
Even in our royal family,
Yeah.
there are people who believe in homeopathy in Britain, in the British royal family. Homeopathy has no real scientific basis.
Oh.
So this, I think what it is humans are susceptible to this sort of, what I would call pseudoscience and nonsense. I think part of it is a feeling that we need some control over our lives. We want to face, the fear of disease or death, or we want to be proud of our heritage. And for those who invoke these scriptures to say, we did this, that, and the other, my view is that of the Science Museum in London, which recently celebrated 5,000 years of Indian science. There is plenty of really good science and accomplishments in India to celebrate.
Wow.
So let's celebrate those things which are real and not make up these fictitious things which just make us look ridiculous.
Well, I hope you're not bored of that, because there's another ridiculous one about the internet that we want to show you.
ये देश वो देश है जिसमें महाभारत में संजय ने बैठ के धृतराष्ट्र को युद्ध में क्या हो रहा था बोल रहा था. तो इसका मतलब क्या है? टेक्नोलॉजी था, इंटरनेट था, सैटेलाइट थी.
The presence of satellite again in Mahabharat.
Yes, well, the question is, if there were such things, why is it that nobody described, even fundamental things like Newton's laws of motion, which
That's
are a
right,
basis,
which has got challenged as well in India.
which are the basis of satellite technology. The whole business of electricity was not really understood until the 1800s, or even the early, the late 19th century. So, to claim that these things existed because of some, description of some, event, doesn't make it true. Okay, so again, if they had described how to generate electricity and what electricity was and how to generate the internet, how to generate computers. Internet depends on computers, which depend on transistors, which depend on quantum mechanics. None of these things existed. Nobody knew about them. Where were they? If for thousands of years, if they existed 2,000 years ago.
Yes.
So again, it's complete nonsense. Okay. And I have no idea why these people say that. Maybe it makes them feel better. They still have, Indians should get over this colonial inferiority complex.
Do you think we have it?
I think some of these people obviously do, and they need to resort to this stuff to somehow pretend that they were great and somehow, things went wrong. Rather, we should say, we're a young nation. I meet hundreds of brilliant young Indians every time I come to India. We should be encouraging them to join the worldwide advance of progress of humanity, rather than looking backward and inventing all this fictitious nonsense.
Okay, the last one, I promise you, the last one. Because, the question of and I want you to answer this after you see these two clips, is what is the impact that all of this, because all of the ones we're playing out to you, Dr. Ramakrishnan, are people who are very influential, who are very popular.
I can tell you one thing, they may be influential and popular, but they know absolutely nothing at all about science.
I know.
Okay?
But
they
are they harming science?
They would flunk a decent science exam. I can tell you that right now. Okay?
Yeah, okay. Okay, can we play out the last two clips, please?
और मेरी जो छोटी सी समझ है उसके हिसाब से मुझे लगता है कि कर्ण का जो जन्म हुआ था वो स्टेम सेल का साइंस था, टेक्नोलॉजी थी। क्योंकि शास्त्र कहते हैं कि कर्ण का जन्म माता कुंती की गोद से नहीं हुआ था। कर्ण के जन्म की सारी जो कथा आती है वो शरीर पर से एक छोटा सा हिस्सा लिया और उसी में से कर्ण पैदा हुए। अब स्टेम सेल वाले यही करते हो ना?
Stem cell research.
Look, the concept of a cell didn't even exist until the 1600s because people didn't have the technology, they didn't have a powerful enough microscope to be even able to see a cell, let alone know the existence of cells. So the idea that somebody knew about stem cells, several thousand years ago, is just, again, completely boggles the mind. You have to think of this as an allegory. Other cultures have this too. We know about the virgin birth, the Virgin Mary and the birth of Jesus, okay? That somebody could say, well, that's stem cell technology as well.
Or surrogacy. Yeah.
So I think, you have to interpret these things allegorically. These scriptures are teaching us how to be moral, how to be good, how to, what is the principle, what is the point of life, what is a good life. So those are the sorts of lessons we should learn from them, not interpret them literally and try to pretend, that we had some science technology, in those days. If we did, where was it?
Yeah.
Where is it described?
I don't know if the second one, that's the last one, I promise you, it's along the same lines or not.
मुझे लगता है कि दुनिया में सबसे पहली प्लास्टिक सर्जरी शरीर मनुष्य का और माथा हाथी का, गणेश जी का निर्माण।
People are applauding Ganesh as an instance of plastic surgery.
Well, it would be more than plastic surgery. It would be a trans-species rejoining, something that is completely absurd because, it isn't possible to transplant a completely different species like an elephant, onto a human a body. It goes against sort of many, many laws of biology as we know it. So, again, one of these things that should be treated allegorically and not literally.
So, Dr. Ramakrishnan, when the Prime Minister says it, do you think it, because he's very popular, do you think that, what is the impact it has on science students or general kids?
Yeah, I think, let me be honest. When I talk to science students in India, they're all very mainstream. They read textbooks. They're interested in molecular biology or physics or whatever. I don't think it actually affects them. This is something that generates a lot of buzz in the news media.
Yeah.
And I would say, to some extent, the news media is to blame for giving these sort of statements any oxygen at all.
We shouldn't pay attention.
You shouldn't pay attention.
Okay.
You should take it in a lighthearted way and sort of ignore it.
Okay.
Because it's neither here nor there. India has a lot of work to do. It has to progress, and it has to build up science and technology. And I think even this government really understands that. And so I think
Despite all of these comments.
I think these comments are probably, I'm not a politician, so I have no idea why they're being made. Maybe they appeal to certain sections of their supporters and so on. But we shouldn't be focusing on that. Rather, we should be focusing on how to educate young people, how to train them in science, how to advance the country.
Okay, so taking your my cue from that note, I want to get back and talk about this book because there's so many aspects about it, and I think I really recommend it to not just people who are interested in science. Of course, for them it must be a must-read. For people like me as well, because it completely changes your perspective about how you look at scientists, how people work at even little things, how people, who win Nobel Prizes, like yourself, even your work culture. It's, for me, a huge revelation as well. For example, even little things like, that you kept regular hours, that you didn't, you had 2 young children, and that you kept regular hours and still managed to win the biggest prize in the world. I mean, that by itself is very encouraging.
Well, I didn't keep regular hours all the time.
Okay.
There are times when you have to work around the clock. But it is true that, I'm one of these people who believes in a good work-life balance. I think you should have other interests. You should, and I have my wife to thank for that. She's very insistent, that I, not insistent, but persuasive, let's say, that I take time off and do other things that get me away from brooding about work all the time. Because you can't, if you brood all the time, you'll just tie yourself up in knots and just fret. And I think so that's a good point. And of course, scientists, people think of scientists as some other species, but we're just like everybody else. We're human beings. We have emotions. We have feelings. We have, jealousies. We have ambition.
Talking about jealousies, what's fascinating about this is the kind of cutthroat. Well, it's not really cutthroat if you think about it as industrial in other workspaces, but for me as well, it was a revelation that even among scientists that, you were all trying to hide what each one was focusing on. And what to me was fascinating at a time when we are all talking about how many women are in science, that your main competitor was another woman.
Yes, that's true. I mean, there have been quite a lot of women in the field of structural biology. In fact, my foreword is written by Jennifer Doudna, who's one of the most famous scientists in the life sciences, woman or man. And she invented this genome editing technology. So yes, that's definitely true.
And do you?
But
think,
you notice that
yeah.
I don't make any allowances
No.
for the fact that she's a woman.
No, of course.
And
that
what's
would fascinating, I don't want to give too much away to our readers, but what's fascinating is I was fascinated by the fact that, she ate into your time. So it's great details about, how the kind of, how competitive things can really get in the Nobel Prize race. Two questions as we wrap up. One, of course, is the fact that you talk a lot about James Watson, of course, another Nobel Prize winner, and someone who, someone who's not that much into science, has, of course, knows as the person behind the DNA. And he's been in the news a lot lately about the treatment of women. I do want you to comment on that.
James Watson is a curious tragedy, I would say. He has done more for the development of molecular biology than probably any other single person, not just with DNA structure, but even the ribosome. He pioneered a lot of ribosome work, which reads genetic information which resides on DNA. He also spurred on the Human Genome Project. He established Cold Spring Harbor. But he has developed rather extreme views about eugenics, about you know, race,
Yes.
gender, and so on. And this is, you know, a case where he has stopped being self-critical. He's had so much success that
In the book, you don't seem impressed by him, though.
that he believes himself to be infallible. Well, no, in the book it's very amusing because he
Yeah.
told me on 2 or 3 occasions that I would never win the Nobel
Exactly,
Prize.
yeah.
And you know, and he said it with great authority.
He was jealous.
No. But he said it with great authority.
I know.
Like, you know, forget about the prize, you're not going to get
Yes,
it.
yes.
And, you know, once was only about 3 weeks or 4 weeks before I actually got the prize.
I know.
So it's very funny. But I would say it's a tragedy, but he's also an anomaly. You know, when Joan Stites, who's one of the great molecular biologists of our time, when she had trouble finding an advisor, you know, in the 60s, Jim Watson took her on. He said, no problem. And then he helped nurture her career.
Yeah.
You know, same with Nancy Hopkins. So I would say he's not an easily understood person, but somewhere along the line, he has stopped being self-critical and has gone off, you know, in this sort of tangent.
And what I find fascinating, and this is my last question, what I find fascinating about your book is that you got the Nobel Prize, but you're not afraid of calling some of the people in that Nobel committee or people who decide a bit pathetic. Tell our viewers why.
No, it's not the committee members. What you're referring to is, you know, the Nobel committee often will invite potential candidates to Sweden. You know, they'll invite them to conferences. And of course, it's all done in a very civilized and subtle way, but really people know that they're being auditioned. Okay? They're stuck in there with lots of people who are not contenders, but they sort of know, you can never be sure who's a contender and who is just there as a decoy. But what's amazing to me was that at one of these meetings, very, very famous scientists were so nervous. They were acting like almost like graduate students before a Viva exam. And I just felt that was pathetic. You know, here were these people who had done absolutely groundbreaking work.
Yes.
And suddenly, you know, they were, you know, trying nervously, you know, pacing around, and one was hyperventilating. And I thought that scene was a little pathetic.
Well, there's so many insights that one can get from this book. So thank you so much, especially for doing a reality check with us. Is there a lot of students right now who are going to be watching? They're probably preparing for exams. I thought there's so much insight there. Do you want to give some advice to them? Because one thing that I want to point to them, which I learned from your book, was that he had already done a lot of work in physics. He was actually working on physics, and he just changed when he realized that that wasn't what he was interested in. And you were in your PhD when you
finished my PhD.
Finished your PhD, and he changed it. So I think you are, in a way, an embodiment of anything's possible.
I think the one lesson, and I remember saying this at the NDTV event a few years ago, is that the important thing is if you want to play the game, you have to keep your options open so that you're still actually playing the game. Otherwise, you'll have to leave the game. So I think keeping your options open is important. I think, you know, exams are an unfortunate, you know, necessity of the educational process. And, you know, it's a bad idea to get too stressed out about them. I would advise students to work hard, study hard, but during exam time, you know, take some time off, you know, to go for a walk, breathe deeply, etc., to just get some of that stress out of your system. That would be my, you know, one piece of advice. And remember, exams are simply a step along the way. They're not a goal. The goal is to find out what you're interested in and do something, you know, that you care about in life. So that's what I tell students to keep things in perspective.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us and giving us so much insight as well. Thank you, Dr. Ramakrishnan.
Thank you.
Thank you.